The shamans see through the illusion completely and refuse to play the game, and so they are forced to live on the fringes of society, providing a limited access to a non-orthodox culture, often shrouded in much mystery. These are the ones who can heal people, offer advice and access to esoteric realms, and know full well that leaving a house full of cobwebs keeps flies down to a sensible minimum, and that cats are much better company than dogs. Now, what happens within the church building itself is actually quite high-end technology, and this is why witches and Wiccans won't set foot in them. The churches, and especially the cathedrals, are built aligned in certain ways on special sites and are heavily reinforced from the outside. This technology is incredibly esoteric in nature. Today no one would seriously believe the mechanics of it, but you do have to ask yourself why churches are built that way and what are they for? I mean, if you look at any Gothic cathedral from the sky, and thankfully Google Maps now removes the need for doing this by broomstick, a cathedral sits on the ground like some kind of monstrous insect. Its stone-vaulted belly is bolstered on all sides by immense stone buttresses, not to hold it up. Oh no, they are to prevent it from exploding. Looked at simply as stonework, a church or a cathedral is an amazing feat of engineering on its own, even by today's standards, without even going into all the time and energy consumed to produce all the carvings and intricacy that we find spattered all over them. Among other things in life, I am an occasional stonemason, and I can personally confirm to you that the precision, the size of the stone blocks, and the sheer bloody volume of stone used to build a cathedral is absolutely fucking mind-blowing. Even with modern tools, cranes, oil, electricity, etc., we'd be pretty hard pushed to build something like that today. So, again, the question has to be asked, what the fuck is it for? Well, with a highly spiritual autonomous people, you cannot pull the wool, yes wool not cotton, over their eyes with gadgets and gizmos or plastic-wrapped food. You can't go putting fluoride into their water supply or vaccinating their children to cut them off from spirit as we do today. But you can, by esoteric means, feed off of their abundant invisible energy by whipping them up into a frenzy of negative energy within a building designed to harness this energy to your own needs if you have the right tools and techniques. What you have to do is get all the people in neat little rows facing east once a week and on particular special occasions when planetary positions are prosperous enough. Now, if you have any doubts about this planetary programming stuff, let's just break it down a little bit. Let's first look at Christmas, the birthday of Jesus. It is celebrated every year on the 21st of December to celebrate the rebirth of the sun. See, more spelling problems. So how come Easter is always on the move? Well, in our modern times, of course, we know when Easter is just a month away by the sudden and unexpected appearance of full shelves of Easter eggs in the supermarket. But in the religious world, Easter is calculated by heavenly cycles, mostly lunar ones to be precise. You see, Easter is nothing to do with celebrating the anniversary of the death and rebirth of Jesus. It is about having a sorrow fest at a very particular time of year. You fill your church with citizens for the best part of 3 days, just to be sure not to miss the precise astral anomaly, and then you get them all on your knees and go to town a little bit more than usual on telling them how fucking bad and miserable and worthless they are, and that he died for you, and you tell them that a swig of wine and a nugget of bread will save their souls. Although these special ceremonies are all programmed to align mostly with lunar and solar cycles, there are some much larger planetary and stellar ones too, and sadly these are very often marked by programmed bloodbaths to be found in the newsreels and the history books. No matter what the cycle, if the cycle is heralded in with joy and abundance, well, the cycle is joyous and abundant. If the cycle is heralded in with hate and suffering, the cycle is hateful and sulphurous. Now, this keeps reality nice and miserable most of the time and maintains people's noses close enough to the grindstone to keep them from being able to get up and get out of the cage. While the people are praying, that is, thinking very hard and projecting their creative energy, the priest leads the words of the prayers, following directives from above in the hierarchy, giving the people's energy to the king, or the crusaders, or whatever else suits them at the time. The energy whipped up by all the bejeweled bingo callers is then beamed out through the tower to maintain the spell across the globe, or plane of course, depending on your earth-shaped convictions. Now, one of the problems with people is that they do begin to evolve. They gradually get smarter and work out what you've been up to, and so new pens do need sitting up to receive escaping flocks. So of course the energy harness has to evolve with them, and this first energy harness held out for about 2,000 years, and indeed it is still with us today, and it has had its ups, downs, splits, schisms, convulsions and U-turns of course. Now, the transitional episodes from one fenceless prison to the next are many, and there are always many pens functioning and overlaying within the same space-time, and as we see today, we have so many of these pens that many of us are wandering through a wide selection of fenceless prisons without ever quite finding the freedom. So we're going to jump to the Renaissance and see what happens there. From the Renaissance onwards, we enter a drive for scientific study of the world around us. Real science is just an evolutionary process. Douglas Adams called it the survival of fittest for the world of ideas. You can observe, theorise, and then present your new idea to the world, and if your idea is any good, it will survive. If it's a load of rubbish, however, somebody will kindly disprove it for you, and it falls off of the tree of life, rather like Newton's apple. Sometimes it is physically possible to prove your idea in a rational way, but remember, disproving it could happen at any time. Nothing is really safe. Even gravity has just ended up in the bin. Physical proof of ideas, and especially quantifying them, is generally known today as rational science. And when I hear the word rational, I'm always very wary because it always rhymes in my ears with rationing. Now, some ideas are not about the physical elements of our world at all, and so these ideas do have to stand the test of time, as by their very nature they cannot be physically proven and are definitely not quantifiable. You can also look at the world of ideas like a very large lake. On the edge are the marginals, thinkers and pioneers who sit under the trees on the shore and dream up new ideas. They set their ideas afloat on the lake like so many paper-crafted sailboats. Many of them take on water and sink, but a few continue on towards the centre. Wading in the shallows not too far away are the progressivists who, a little less radical than the pioneers, can see the immediate value of the idea and how it could be beneficial to the whole. They pick up the boat, study it, reappropriate it, test it this way and that, and then reinvent it with the willing participation of the pioneer and make it stronger and more user-friendly. And so the idea goes on, gaining weight and size as it advances towards the centre of the lake. Now near the centre of the lake is where the population is at its densest, and any misgivings about which way to interpret the word densest can be cleared up with one word: both. Now as the little boats advance, there is a line that gets crossed when an idea ceases to be original and suddenly becomes mainstream. For it to be applied to the masses in the middle, it must first be made completely idiot-proof, thus removing nearly all of its good points, and then it must be mass-produced, distributed, and sold many times over. In the very epicentre of this lake is a sudden and vicious whirlpool, where the idea suddenly expires and disappears down the whole of history, making a few stops in third world countries first. At first it is a shame, and then a few years later it was a scandal, and a generation later it was a crime against humanity, ecology, industry, cinematography, noddy, or whatever. In the 1700s, the science of agriculture suddenly developed very high production techniques that required a lot less manpower, and especially man presence. Seed drills, small horse-drawn machines, crop rotation and selective breeding all piled up together and ganged up to put an end to subsistence production and the feudal system. In England, up until that point, each family had at least 4 acres of land to live on and handed over a varying percentage of their produce to the local lordy pants, plus a further 10% to the church. Don't forget, we are talking about simple peasant folk who know not how to count. The lordy pantses removed the people from the land by force and decree to then open the way for this new modern agriculture. Regional specialisation had suddenly begun, and along with high-speed reliable transport, that's 30 miles an hour by steam, but reliably on time. All this developing disturbance neatly provided a huge homeless population ready to send into the newly emerging industrial complex. It began with textile mills and mines and steam engines and new ways of working metals. Human ingenuity could suddenly and efficiently harness water energy and especially fossilised energy. The development of new things and new ways to produce them had suddenly become exponential, and it kind of still is. The common people at this time were literally treated like animals. The endless rows of terraced houses around the coal, steel and textile industries in the north of England are still witness today to the mentality of the overlords at the time. Industry's workforces were cooped up on top of one another in single-skin brick shells, all facing the narrow and sunless road where all of their primary needs would now come from through commerce and transport. Only the reinforced concrete tower block would supersede this architectural cruelty, but more of that later. However, by piling humans together and making travel possible, new ideas would pop out, mutate and spread themselves around, rather like a lot of the diseases that also ran rife at the time. Squalor is apparently the mother of all invention. One of these was the socialist ideal, which, like all of the other ideas at the time, didn't come from the bottom at all. It actually had its beginnings in a Scottish industrialist who actually cared about his workers. And he wasn't alone in this, but the paternalists of the period were rather thinner on the ground than the bastards were. Having decided that his workers would live in good conditions, and that their children would be educated and not made to work in the dangerous mills, and that there would be a code of cleanliness in the factory village, and not only that, but there would even be a good behaviour and moral charter, Mr. Robert Owen went on to single-handedly fund the first ever socialist experiment, as he bought a small village in the middle of America, and a whole load of intellectuals and philosophers went out there on a boat to live out the new egalitarian ideals. The human ecosystem in this experimental village was unfortunately not diverse enough. There were too many thinkers and not enough doers, and after 5 years of dreary debate on human equality and how to enforce it on a community level, right down to all produce, even garden-grown lettuces, being obliged to pass first through the village fucking shop to ensure both equality and guarantee the wiltedness of the greens, the experiment solidly fell apart. But the idea had begun to spread, and not yet among the common folk. It would first spread among the young and rebellious rich of Europe. As paternalism gave birth to socialism, one man named Karl Marx decided to write it all out and define a society that would one day require no governance, no state, and especially no capitalists. He was of a mind that this would happen all on its own, as capitalism could be relied on to continue to tighten its grip to such a ridiculous extent that people would naturally wake up and suddenly become fair, egalitarian socialist citizens all of their own accord. However, this vision of waiting for it to happen at the time may well have been intrinsically linked to Marx's extreme laziness. He was absolutely sure once he had the inspiration that he would have it all written out within 5 weeks, and finally 5 years later his friends and financiers finished his work for him. In fact, Marx's original vision lines up pretty much precisely with how permaculture and transition are spreading today, and the outlook of permaculture creating a horizontally, mutually responsible, diverse society looks much more like Marxism than socialism or communism ever have. But because the new socialist ideal didn't manifest itself into reality straight away, a few motivated and zealous believers decided to help it along with a few organised revolutions. Now, revolutions are quite odd and dangerous things. You take a pyramidal hierarchical structure. Now, for the benefit of listeners' internal visuals, this pyramid has a triangular base and not the square one so often suggested on the dollar bill. So start again. You take a pyramidal hierarchical social structure and you're at the bottom and very angry about the top, and you could sit at the top, could do with a bloody good stint of living at the bottom to see what that was like, and the top should be able to have a good go at the top to see what that was like. So you all get together with pitchforks and scythes or whatever, and you push and you tip it over. The structure has rolled over, it has revolved. However, the unforeseen problem is that if you don't fundamentally change the shape of the structure, no matter which bloody way you roll it, it always ends up by being pointy at the top.